everybody? Richard Dolan here for a courageous conversation.
Well, man, today you're right. There's no going back.
How do you feel the weight of that desire?
I have been there for a while.
Story's still being written, and you cut the story short. As they say, I'm playing with house money.
They said, neo-fascist.
You can't imagine, Richard. I've heard everything now.
But I'll tell you what, you ain't never buying your time back. Value your time.
Once you start a courageous conversation, there ain't ever going back to an ordinary one.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see so many people in the house. What's up, Claire? Good to see you guys. Hey, Eric Laflamme. Good to see you. What's up, Manish? What's happening, everybody? What's up, Vincent? Good to see you guys. Good to see everybody as we're just getting started. Good afternoon, and as most great, courageous conversations against COVID, it always has to have some sort of a cocktail. Now, it may not be a cocktail. Could be some sort of divine elixir of hope, or perhaps good vegetarian goods. But here's to you, Claire. I know that Mark Jean's not too far behind me, so I hope you guys had a wonderful week. So here's to you for surviving at another one, shall we? All right. Vincent's all smiles today. It's good to see you, man. What's up, Paulo? What you drinking there, Ashley? Hold on. Let me unmute you, buddy. What do you have in there, buddy?
Just water right now.
Okay, sounds
But
adventurous.
later on, it'll get some scotch.
All right. And what's your scotch?
It varies. It depends on the day.
That's okay. A scotch every day is a good scotch on any day. You got it. What's up, Steve Druth? How you keeping, man?
Doing great, thank you. I've got I've got a red Solo cup full of water.
Look at you.
Looks good.
It looks good. It looks good. If there's a ping pong going anywhere, I got to tell you right now and there, I'd say, gosh, that's going to be something to watch out for. So,
Yeah.
But,
Just yell at me if I get distracted with the ping pong ball.
that's okay. And how's Miami holding up?
Fantastic. Beautiful day.
Wonderful to hear.
It's so bright I had to put the shade down.
That's okay. I'm sure
How
you
you
can
doing?
take it. I'm doing good, buddy.
Yeah, you
It's
look
to
good.
see you. Yeah, it's good to see you, man. Good to see you. What's up, Jay? You keeping well?
Oh yeah, just working away, and it's unfortunately raining here, but it's Calgary weather, so some days it's snowing, some days it's raining, some days the sun's out, so can't really keep track of that, but overall, it's good.
Wonderful. Well, it's good to see you, man. It's good to see you as people are still checking in. Hey, why don't we, as Maximillion is just, he's just getting in started. I know that he's getting himself set up, but why don't we give him a good sense of where we're all from? Put in your first name and where you are in the world, so he has a good sense of just who's in the house. Because I've got a good sense of who's in the house, and I know that you folks know where you're coming from. Well, I know we've got Paulo in from Montreal, Canada, Max. We've got Julian from Sacramento, California. Miriam in from Dubai. Good to see you, Miriam. It's good to see Jay in from Calgary. It's good to see Ashley in from Sacramento. You've got a lot of Calgary in the house. You got Steven from Miami Beach. You've got Yusuf in from Germany. You've got Claire in from the London, UK region. So you've got a neighbor in the house. Matt Zolte is also in the UK. You've got Neiman from Edmonton. You've got Joseph from the OC, California. You've got Toronto, the 6 in the house. That's Simi. You've got Paulo. You've got Brad. You've got David from, it says near Dayton, Ohio. I guess that's opposed to being in Dayton, Ohio. That's okay. I see you. It's good to see Dallas Chavez and from Dallas, Sacramento, California. Eric Laflamme from the capital of Canada, Ottawa. Good to see you. So why don't we give Max a real big, warm welcome. This is a courageous conversation against COVID. Mr. Max Cooper, do you have a cocktail there, sir? Is that, I just see that there? My friend. Why don't we give this good friend of ours, I just unmuted you, Max, so cheers to you, mate.
Cheers.
Good to see you, my friend.
Accent you did there.
You got something going on there. So, ladies and gentlemen, good to have Mr. Maximillion Cooper in the house. Hey, Max, aside from an incredible introduction, which I've got all prepared for, yes, we can give him an applause. I saw that digitally. I saw that. When I reached out to Max, there's so many ways I can introduce Max to you all as, known as the founder of this incredible institution called Gumball 3000 And for anybody that's really up for some really good reading, I take this into the bathroom every time I go in there. I haven't quite gotten through it, but as you can tell, but a beautiful gift that always is front and center in my home. But not only known as the incredible husband to the gorgeous and most talented Eve, the rapper, but an incredible father to some incredible children. I mean, he's been revered as a best friend amongst some of the most iconic people, leaders, icons in the world, whether it's a David Hasselhoff or a David Beckham or a Tony Hawk. But I think aside from all those wonderful things, I've never come across a cooler cat that really was a walking demonstration of living his passion. I mean, everything about Max is just that he's really on purpose because he lives his passion. So Max, would that be a real great way to introduce you, sir?
Well, it's an honor to hear such amazing words, but yes, I mean, I'm very thankful that what I do across many sort of genres combines all my passions, basically. So I'm very lucky in that sense.
Well, it's good to see you, my friend. So thanks for doing this. As we've been doing this now for just over 6 weeks, as we have friends all around the world, and thanks to our partners at Google, they digitized this and pushed this out to just under 200,000 of our closest friends and family members. So we're delighted to let this be shared with our very close friends to edit out any the inappropriateness, which I'm guaranteed to give. So that we can
when it actually kind of goes out, you know, when it's edited and it goes out sort of everywhere. But I have to mention that this weekend would be the start of this year's rally in Toronto. And so I'm sat here in London kind of thinking what would have been if I was in Toronto today.
And how apropos that we selected this particular day to have this particular conversation. Absolutely. I'm sitting in Toronto. So here's to you, my friend.
Cheers.
Okay, so here's where we got to start. For everyone that's checking in, these conversations have always been about looking on the landscape, searching the world, and finding people that we're inspired by and are moved by their courage to do what they love doing, their courage to persevere the way they are. So Max, with that setup, first of all, let's start with you as a dad, as a leader, as the coolest cat I know. How have you and the Cooper family been coping during this COVID-19 era?
I mean, you know, we're all in the same boat. So, you know, it's one of those things that I'm kind of dealing with it in the best way that I possibly can. You know, when you employ a lot of people and you're putting a lot of events on and people are, you know, excited by what you do, when this sort of comes along and everything has stopped, you know, it's really tough. You know, I mean, like I said, you know, this next 7 days would have been essentially putting on 40 events over 7 days in 3 different countries, including music concerts, car rally, car shows, Indy 500 activations, the whole lot really. And, you know, I mean, even this last week, we would have employed a few thousand people in the whole production of this. And so, you know, the impact is one, looking at it from my perspective of, you know, it sucks that we're not out there doing stuff and having fun and putting this on, but there's a bigger impact as well. You know, I mean, it's changing. The impact is on everybody's lives that was involved in this, both from a work perspective and enjoyment perspective. And what's the world like without entertainment? It kind of sucks, right?
It completely blows, for sure. I mean, as a wise man once taught me, it truly sucks balls. I mean, you know, being caught up and held up and relegated to your home. I mean, you out of all guys, I can't see living at home very long. How are the kids coping with mom and dad at home as full time?
Well, you know, my eldest two, they're sort of 17 and 16, and they're in the years where in England you do these exams called GCSEs and A levels, which kind of is your passport into university really. And they've both been cancelled for the first time ever. So, you know, one daughter who's 18 is kind of pretty upset they're cancelled because she was actually really ready and had done lots of work and wasn't kind of scared by exams coming. But my 16-year-old daughter, she's just like jumping hoops. I mean, she's most happy she can be that these exams are cancelled, you know, and hopefully, because the educational system over here haven't quite figured out how everybody gets their results this year. You know, we're just sort of fingers crossed that they get the grades they need to get just from reports and such, really. So, you know, they're doing all right. And then my other two kids are doing lessons every day online. But that's, you know, that's the new normal, isn't it?
It truly is. And there's nothing digital that you can do really about the Gumball 3000. And before we get into the what it is and how it started and all that sort of stuff, I mean, there's very few things in life that you just can't supplement digitally. I mean, you've got to get into a car. You've got to feel it. You've got to hear it. I mean, for those who haven't watched any of the Gumball 3000 movies that cover any one of the rallies around the world, of course, that depicts the one from Miami to Ibiza. I mean, they're all visceral. They're all about celebrating life. They're all about truly championing design. So you've got to touch it. You've got to feel it. What have you been passing your time with though? Are you still researching the new coming cars? Are you still at least tracking where the developments are? Do you think that world has kind of paused for a while now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at things on multiple levels, really. I think, first and foremost, back in March, we made the call, or rather we were forced into making the call at that time to kind of postpone this year's event because, this was we were slightly on the cusp before sort of lockdowns officially began. But obviously we were planning a music concert free for the public in Young Dundas Square in Toronto, actually tonight, the night before the rally actually would start. And that was for sort of circa 50,000 people. And then along the route, we put on, like I said before, many, many other events and parties and such. But in Havana, which is really kind of groundbreaking, taking all the cars there, doing a kind of a lap of the island and then crossing the finish line in Havana itself, we were scheduled to put on a music concert there, again, free for everyone, and a kind of a who's who lineup of artists that are all driving in the rally. And we were expecting upwards of 500,000 people to attend. And, obviously we're dealing with the governments there. We're dealing with the government and the authorities in Toronto as well. And they're all sort of, we got a great relationship with them. And they're sort of saying, you know what, it looks like public events are going to be cancelled. We can't host them. And so we were sort of, we just had to make that call because the closer the event gets, the implementation of the production is already in motion. And not only that, because drivers taking part in this rally come from all around the world, they've got to fly their cars or ship their cars there. And the last thing I wanted really was to sort of leave it too late and have all these angry drivers sort of pretty pissed with me because they've flown their car there or put their car on a boat and then they get told it's cancelled. So I just had to make that call fairly early on. And so, it was obviously the right call. And as things panned out in the following sort of 2 or 3 weeks, the world went into lockdown and, every event is cancelled that you can think of. For the rest of this summer at least. So we made that call to kind of postpone it. So we are doing the same route this time next year. Our dates are scheduled around the Indy 500. So next year's Indy 500 means that Gumball will run from 28th of May to the 4th of June. And so essentially, by postponing it, by pushing it ahead, by pushing it back by 12 months, an element of us as sort of, we're a little bit relaxed again because, it's a long way off. But at the same time, we can't afford a year with no more revenue because a lot of people have already paid for this year's one and sponsors and so on. So we just sort of, we've got to look at what we do as a company, as a brand. And I mean, thankfully, whilst people know the rally if they know the rally, if they know of Gumball, they know it through the rally predominantly. But actually, the rally serves to be our sort of backbone. And behind the scenes, we've got sort of several other Gumball companies that are cross licensing and merchandise and apparel. And I mean, we sell Gumball products right now in over 40,000 stores around the world. So we've got to kind of keep maintaining that and supporting that with sort of marketing essentially. But it's just strange times,
No, it is strange times. And, whether you call it a pivot or a reinvention, at the end of the day, there's just no substitute for just good old fashioned community. And if there's one thing about Gumball 3000, you're a community. So for those who don't know, we're joined here by Maximillion Cooper, the brain, the genius, the legend, the leader behind this thing called Gumball 3000. So let's get into what Gumball 3000 is, because there are some people that are writing me right now saying, what is Gumball 3000? I heard of Max, I know Eve, love them both, but I'm really not quite clear. And I've once often said that, well, when I was growing up, and this might age me, might actually age you too, I remember seeing the, you know what I'm going to say, the Cannonball Run.
Absolutely.
And the Cannonball Run was this really, who here, just put your name in the chat room. Tell me if you remember the Cannonball Run. Jay, you can't do that because I know you're too young, but looking at you. But I mean, the Cannonball Run was this incredible collection of very famous people who drove incredible cars at the time. And they all were, in fact, to race through a particular part of the world from one point to another to win a prize. So when I first heard of the Gumball 3000, I thought, this is fantastic. There's got to be a movie about this. Of course, there was. But aside from that inspiration, I don't want to curb your nor shape your answer, Max. How would you best describe where the inspiration for Gumball 3000 came from?
So, you know, whilst I did grow up watching Cannonball Run and those other kind of road movies of the 70s, and there's definitely some inspiration by that, I think what happened for me was slightly more organic than really kind of seeing those and trying to replicate them. Essentially, I spent the 1990s kind of combining, again, all the things I'm into. So let's say by the end of my teenage years, I was a fairly all right proficient skateboarder. And that action sports world was kind of making my life tick, and I was sponsored and so on, and it was taking me around the world, and hence a lot of friendships with people like Tony Hawk and people in that kind of world really have stemmed from many, many years ago. I then, like a lot of other kind of late teenagers, don't really know what you want to do. I think apart from just skateboarding, sport was my whole life. That was what I was into. I think I was also into the culture of sport at a very young age without realizing it, and into the fashion of it, whether that's football kits or skate culture, street culture. I was pretty kind of always, had a passion for that and interest in it. So when I was 18, I went to a college in London called St. Martin's, which is a very famous fashion school. And again, I went there because sport and art were what made me tick. I never wanted to design women's wear or whatever, which a lot of people go there for. It was always kind of a sports-related kind of interest for me. But if you're in the arts world or the fashion world, you'll know of it. My tutor there was John Galliano. I was in the same class and year as Alexander McQueen and Stella McCartney and Giles Deacon, all these people that are kind of been running the fashion industry for the last sort of 20, 30 years. By pure chance, we were there at the same time in the same class. And so I had this kind of fashion world sort of suddenly, imposed on me. I was in it. I was designing, living in London now at this point, part of that London fashion scene. I'm giving you this background story because it's really how Gumball came about. But I then got very lucky, and again, going back, I'm 47 now, so going back to late teenage years, a little bit younger, a bit more hair. I got asked to model for a few different brands. And
was Speedo one of them? According to my notes, Speedo was one of them. Is this a rumor?
That's a rumor. No, I was very lucky. I looked very much the kind of stereotypical English kind of look that was probably popular at the time for a few fashion companies, including Giorgio Armani and Ralph Lauren. And I ended up being in their adverts for about 5 years in a row, doing their runway shows along with many other brands. But it gave me some great money at a very early age. And what did I do with that money? I didn't spend it wisely. I spent it on the one sporting pursuit that I'd never had the opportunity to do as a kid, and that was to race cars. I literally got my checks from these brands, and I would spend it all at a race circuit in England called Silverstone or Donington, and I would practice at every available weekend. And I started at the bottom of the ladder in what's called Formula Ford and worked my way up. And so over probably a 6-year period of the 1990s, I was studying fashion, modeling, and racing cars for Porsche and McLaren all at the same time. And so basically also getting friendships in those worlds. And obviously, like I mentioned, some of the people were becoming famous or successful in their industries already at this time in the fashion world. The likes of Tony Hawk and that were becoming more famous in their world. And then just being in that circle of sort of racing cars, obviously got to know a lot of different drivers that went on to become very successful later on. But I was also coming in contact with some very wealthy people around the world, very successful people, whether they were the fashion brand owners, whether they were the influencers at the time in those sort of worlds as photographers or magazine editors, and also the wealthy guys that were the team sponsors or team owners in my own racing. And so essentially by the end of the 90s, my little black book at the time, my whatever we had, Filofax maybe back then, if people remember Filofax. I don't think I ever had
your Palm Pilot.
Palm Pilot is a bit lazy,
I can't believe it.
I think. But anyway, my address book by the end of the 90s was a bit of a who's who from around the world, really. And I wanted to create something that could bring all of those people together, because they didn't all mix together. You know, my skateboarding friends and my wealthy race car owner friends didn't know each other, but I kind of felt like I could create something they both enjoy. And so, bit of a kind of a route to this, I actually tried to buy a Formula One team. And I don't know if any of you follow Formula One or are fans of it, but you know, it was my dream back then to drive in Formula One. I wasn't quite good enough. So what's the next best thing? You try and own a team. And I wanted to own a team to kind of have an impact in it, to bring this kind of music and fashion and sort of action sports culture to a slightly corporate car racing world, as I felt back then. You know, one day I'm going to events and parties with BMW, Mercedes, and McLaren, which were great events and cost those companies a lot of money to host and were very corporate and well done. And maybe the next night I was going to a fashion industry party that had very little money, but was really rock and roll. And I enjoyed it a lot more. And so I just wanted to kind of blur those industries. And so I tried to buy this Formula One team, not with my own money. I hadn't made that much money at that point, but it was with the investment of the team owner of the McLaren team I was driving for at that point. And unfortunately, we got outbid by British American Tobacco by lucky strike. They ended up buying this team called Tyrrell. And so I found myself at the end of sort of 1998, having got all these friends together, essentially told them about my vision to create a Formula One team that was going to be sexier and more rock and roll than anything that existed. I'd got all my wealthy friends together to help support the you know, bankroll it. And suddenly we got nowhere to go with it. So what do? That's how the rally idea came about. I thought if I can kind of give all these friends of mine an experience, bring them together, instead of just for one night or a party or a conference or whatever you want to call it. I didn't want it to be like that. I wanted this to just be a fun time, not talk about creating any business out of it, just show these friends that I could organize something. And anyway, long story short, that was April 1999, 50 odd friends that I'd invited to kind of join me on this road trip around Europe sort of said, yeah, they're in. And I organized the most amazing sort of 6 days that I could think of, staying in chateaus, having musician friends perform at different parties. And, you know, back then there was no social media. It was just the 110 people or whatever it was, 2 people in a car that enjoyed this road trip. And there were probably sort of 20 famous people in that group of people. And by September that year, Gumball got a feature about that rally, that first one. Photos and editorial came out, and we got covers of GQ, Esquire, Maxim, and FHM magazine. And that was in the September, October of that year. And you can imagine that would be pretty powerful still now, even though they're less impactful. But back then, that was as big as it got in media terms. And it was all, of course, it was following the stories and the anecdotes and the photos that were led by some of the big celebrities that were driving in it. But it got me awareness. It was my platform to build on. And that's what happened. You know, so what Gumball is, it's a 6-7 day road trip that brings together the most eclectic group of people from around the world. A lot of them influential in their industries, but strategically across music, film, sport, fashion, business, and other. A few sheikhs in there, a few princes, a few oligarchs, and so on. Many sports stars, and it's a melting pot for kind of an adventure. And so we created this unique adventure that people wanted to be part of. And as the media world sort of, you know, went online, fans started to hear about it, and it just sort of grew from there, really. I could tell you more about the background, but I think that's enough.
No. It's great. It's great. Not meaning to paraphrase, but what I get out of that, and it's the second time we had this conversation about where it started, is the first thing that strikes me is that you began to recognize very early the power of proximity, right?
Yeah.
Knowing that who was the movers and shakers and the idea makers in your world, you already had a good intuition as to who those people would be. Number two is that you really learned early the power of relationship. So you sound like a person that really understood the importance of creating a relationship. Just even you and I, it's not as if we live next door and I see you all the time, but you're really good at allowing there to be room to create a relationship to each other. And by the way, you just bought me a whole new year of getting a couple new sponsors that I was delayed on getting this year. So
and I'm going to drive in it next year as well. You've got time to prepare.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that because I've got a good story as to why I should have driven back in Vegas, but we'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
But the most incredible thing about you, and I want to say this slowly because I also want people, one of the biggest reasons why we do what we do in these conversations is to create some real teachable moments, is you didn't look to create a business. You weren't looking to find a way to make money off people. You really were stand to create an experience that you not only knew that you wanted for yourself, but knew other people wanted too. And out of that, you created an institution. Is that a fair
back then, I think I had a very strong vision to create, and I did use the word back then, to create a brand. I did want to create a brand back then that could kind of have these sort of quite eccentric ingredients, really. And knowing, I think, probably from the sort of industry background in fashion, I was always fascinated by why the public would follow and buy into certain brands. Why will, if you've got choices, why does one of us buy a t-shirt from Gucci and another from Topshop? Or they're the same item. If it's a plain black t-shirt, it's the same thing. But essentially you follow and you're inspired by image and different cultures. And I think I was always fascinated by that. And I always thought that, I wanted to create something that just people wanted to be part of. That's what it was. And I think you're totally right that I needed money back then, absolutely, because, even that first rally actually put me into a bit of debt. So I needed money just to pay for ongoing business and life and everything, but I always kind of had this philosophy that if I do things right and people like it, eventually the money will come.
But notice something, Max, you were in debt on an exercise that brought people together. And you were all more about the relational equity that you were building than about developing cash flow for yourself at a profit.
Absolutely. But I also think that that's something in, 20 years later after doing this, and I've done many business talks at, universities and such. I think, there's many things that people that study business, you can't study. It's impossible to study, and I think, there's also something about having an entrepreneurial spirit that can't be taught, that you need motivation of your own to achieve things.
Well, here's what's kind of cool is that as much as I'm a fan of yours, and of course I love your family, Eve included, but your dad is a rock star. So one could also argue that one doesn't fall far from the apple tree, or in your case, the cool tree. Your dad's an artist. For anyone that really wants to look up Max's dad, this guy is a celebrated artist. You feel that some part of your creative genius and your love and affection and affinity to be creative is in the DNA, or do you think it's something that you picked up through the years of school?
I think it's in the DNA of my family for sure. And I think when I look back on it now, a lot of what I have achieved and my ambitions and motivations have come from my childhood for sure. A lot of those have been rebellions against it too, in the sense that I think my parents never really had any money growing up, but they had and still have, they're still together, and they're not that old really, they're in their late 60s now, I think 68, 69. They've had a very beautiful, idyllic lifestyle. The part of the world they live in is in English countryside in an area called the Malvern Hills. It's beautiful, kind of remote, rural England. So, you know, part of it is enhanced by just the sheer kind of geography of where they live. But within that sort of world of theirs, money has never meant anything to them. And, you know, I often think, even particularly recently in this kind of lockdown period, that what my dad has done my whole life is go out. They live in this very beautiful little farmhouse with a little stable block, which is my dad's studio. And my dad goes out to paint.